Nice guy Eddie talking weapons again. For today's video, I'm going to demonstrate something that's a little bit larger than the daggers I've usually been talking about. I just don't have the depth of field to show you what I want to show you today. So for this video, we're going to have to go outside.
Today I want to talk about these two pieces, Scottish Claymore and Bardiche. Actually, the Claymore of James I, as it was marketed. These were both graduation presents. This from my parents, the Bardiche from my then girlfriend, soon to be future ex-wife. If you now understand, being that these are graduation gifts, if you now get the joke in the title of the video, congratulations, you're old. These are both wall hangers. So I don't really know what much I can say about wall hangers other than to say, ta-da, don't they look good hanging on the wall. They're not functional weapons. The Bardiche could actually be, I believe you could hone this down, but we'll get into later in the video why I don't want to do that. The only other really kind of personal thing to say about these is that my then girlfriend, soon to be future ex-wife, bought both of these pieces in a tourist shop in Alexandria, Virginia. It was down by the river, about 10 blocks from where she lived. She picked this up for me. She then got the Claymore at the same store for my parents, helping them out. And she lived about 10 blocks from the store, so you can imagine her walking back from, downtown Alexandria with a giant axe or sword on her back, which, kind of a funny image to think about. That's about all I have to say on the personal level about these. So, and by the way, don't ever drive your sword directly into the ground. That's a terrible practice, but I just did it with this. So as I mentioned, these are wall hangers. Not much else I can say about them. They look attractive hanging on the wall. If this were a functional weapon, it would be one of my favorite pieces of my collection, but it's not. And I'll explain some of the flaws of it just in terms of why you couldn't, say, put an edge on it and make it into a sword. Now, you can still buy this piece. This piece is still marketed today I found it on a website called Las Tiendas de las Espadas, which means the sword shop in Spanish. It operates out of Toledo. That's Toledo, Spain, not Toledo, Ohio. Get it right. And the sword, in fact, this one was made in Toledo. I believe the new piece is as well. Toledo, Spain, as I mentioned in my first video, is famous for sword making, and most of the best wall hangers today come from Toledo. Other than just the general appearance of it, it has this very attractive vegan leather wrap on the hilt, which is nice and comfortable. But anyway, enough of that. So in terms of the actual sword, it's supposed to be a replica of the James I Claymore. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not, but it's sold today under the same description. There is no edge on the blade. It's not sharp. Has a nice little pointy point, but no edge. And I think I mentioned in some of the dagger reviews or dagger videos that I think I've used literally these words: would I want to grab it with my hand, squeeze it, and run my hand down it? No. Yeah, perfectly safe, except for the little point at the end. So, as wall hangers go, I have to say this does not have the issue with weight and balance that some of my other wall hangers have. It's pretty good for weight and balance. Not really too much of a problem there. I have a couple of one-handed arming swords or broadswords that I'm going to be doing the next video on, which I hope is the last video that I'm doing purely on wall hangers. Get into some of the more functional pieces after that, but those are terrible for weight and balance. This is not bad. It's not what I would call lively, but I've seen worse. Biggest problems with this: first of all, the material it's made of, and I'm not going to put it into the dirt. I'm just going to rest it here. The material it's made of is a little on the wobbly side. You want your swords to flex, of course, but I feel like this is excessive. The other thing with the blade geometry, I'm going to come in and show you this tang. So you can see here, look at how wide the blade is, and then as we zoom in there, let's see if we can zoom in there, you can see that the tang is basically just the depth of that hole. I wonder if I can get in, if I catch the light just right. I guess not. So anyway, you can see where that tang gets very narrow relative to the blade, and it goes through the hilt, so it's very long, very skinny. And again, perfect right angle to the wider part of the blade. So I just feel like it's so narrow that even if I were to sharpen this, if I were to then make a cut against a harder target, not a tree obviously, but something with some resistance, I just feel like the blade would just rip off right in this area. That is a design feature, as I mentioned, that's very common on swords, not a design element that's common on a lot of swords. If the sword is designed properly, if the metal is selected properly, if it's tempered properly, it's not that big an issue. On a sword like this though, don't. Just don't. Some people think you can take wall hangers and make them into functional swords. You can't, and that's the reason why. The other thing I'm not also about its construction, because wall hangers, because they're not meant for use, sometimes their construction can be a little dodgy. This pommel has a flat section here. I would imagine that makes it easier to tighten it because it's screwed down onto that tang that comes through the hilt. The pommel flat sections are here. When I bought the sword, they were 90 degrees to that. They were parallel to the quillins. It has come loose over the years, and I've had to tighten it to the point that this is now 90 degrees to where it started. Again, it's loose. It's meant to just hang statically on the wall, not be swung around. Okay, that's its purpose. And the blade is actually sitting a little bit crooked in there right now, even now. So the other thing that I would not be crazy about this particular sword model, if this were a functional weapon, my one complaint would be the location of these flutes down here on the ricasso. For those not in the know, that the ricasso is a section of the blade that is not sharpened. The ricasso on this sword goes to about here, and it serves a couple of purposes. One, it makes it a little bit easier to manufacture and maintain. I don't actually need the sharp of the blade to go all the way down to the hilt. What the heck am I going to be cutting down here? It's unnecessary. So, just start the blade up here. It also serves to strengthen the blade down here while also distributing more of the weight towards the hilt. The balance point of this sword is, as I say, that's about right there. That's not bad. For a sword this size, that's not terrible. And again, this was not meant with combat in mind. So, again, weight and balance, not really my biggest complaint. But the location of these flutes and on this ricasso, I wish they were a little bit higher. And in fact, on the model that they're selling today, which is identical, it has the same pommel, the same quillins and handguard, the same attractive vegan leather wrapped hilt, and the same overall blade geometry. They've changed the stamping, and they've moved these flutes down a bit, basically to the top of the ricasso, about 2 inches up the blade. And I would like that a little bit better, because the other thing you get with a ricasso, I don't want to say the whole point, but one of the benefits you get when you have the ricasso and you have these flutes is in half sorting. Now, half sorting is a technique where if I'm trying to hit a specific weak spot, a joint, an opening in the armor of an opponent, it can be difficult way out here, okay? It could be difficult to try to hit a precise point from this distance. However, if I put my hand on the blade, I can now hit much more precisely. And if I have a ricasso to work with, then at least I can put my hand on a part of the blade that isn't sharp. Now, you might think it's crazy to grab the blade and do that. It is actually a technique. It's not as bad as it sounds. But if I have a flat to work with, and if I have flutes, I'm even better. So the flutes, if I were to half sword and press, it gives my lead hand something to actually exert some force on without the risk of running up the blade. It's kind of important. Nice. The other thing, if they were further up, and on some great swords and larger swords, you will see that the section of the ricasso below the flutes is wrapped with the same vegan leather I'll stop the joke. The same little vinyl wrap that they put here, they could put up on the ricasso, and not only would that be more comfortable for half swording, but in a pinch, I could actually pick the sword up and wield it one-handed and have some small amount of hand protection, and again, not run the risk of running my hand up the blade. The problem with where these are located is my hand is practically on them. If they were about 2 inches up, I could put my hand on it comfortably and not be squeezing the flutes themselves, which is not very comfortable. Now, that being said, these are not always up. Sometimes these flutes are all the way down at the hilt on some long swords. That's not a problem. They still serve a purpose. They just they don't serve the same purpose. And if these were a little bit higher, I just feel like it would be a little more representative and a little more useful. So that's about all I can say about the Claymore. Let's move on now to the the Bardiche. So, the Bardiche is basically a large two-handed axe. It is definitely a two-handed weapon. You just couldn't, it would be very awkward. I can swing it one-handed. I can't wield it one-handed. So it's a two-handed weapon. It is a polearm. It's in the polearm category, but it is not a, which is one of the things I like about it, because polearms are cool, but they're not easy to find. There's not a lot of polearms on the market. You can find them. I'm not saying there are none, but there are way more swords being sold and marketed right now than polearms. And among the polearms being sold, they basically fall into three categories. Spears, if you count that as a polearm, but let's ignore spears for the moment. Of the polearms being sold, like 90% are halberds. I like halberds. I own 2 halberds, but that's like 90% of what's available. So I think it's cool. One of the things I like about this piece, even if it is a wall hanger, is that it's a polearm and not a halberd, which is kind of nice. Also not a poleaxe. That was, I'd say 90% of them are halberds and the rest are poleaxes. That's basically all you're going to find these days when it comes to polearms. There are a couple of bardiches, but again, they're fairly uncommon. So for that reason alone, I like this piece. It's also quite eye-catching. I mean, the blade is, on the axe blade is quite visually arresting, if you will. Now, this is not necessarily the definitive Bardiche. You will find differences. In some cases, the blade will be swept up and you'll have this full crescent shape. In some cases, the lower portion connects to the shaft. So there are differences. And also, you might find different lengths. And we're going to talk about the length in a moment, because the length is one of the issues with this Bardiche. Again, I don't really know what else to say about wall hangers. It's a nice decoration on the wall. It's a conversation piece, etc. And it was given to me as a graduation present by my then girlfriend, soon to be future ex-wife. So this is a piece that I've always liked. The guy in the shop actually really liked it, because at the time, this was 1996, there was no eBay, there was no Amazon, there was no Cult of Athena, there was no online commerce. If you wanted to buy swords, you had to find a tool and knife shop or a souvenir shop that just happened to have some, and you were stuck with whatever 2 or 3 pieces were in their inventory. Not a lot of selection. And a piece like this was unheard of at the time, so it was kind of cool to have it. But let's talk about this as a potential, as a functional weapon. Could I put an edge on this? Yeah, I mean, it's steel. It's decent steel, I guess. It is beveled, so you could actually sharpen that down without too much trouble. Would I want to do that? No. I mean, I do like that it's hanging on the wall. I don't necessarily need it to be everything in my collection to be functional. I will say this. I mentioned with the video on the police club that was the only weapon I have that has seen combat. However, there are a handful of weapons in my collection that have drawn blood. My blood, usually, and this is one of them. And what happened was, it was hanging on the wall, and I'm arranging the pieces. You've seen the picture. It was you've seen all the weapons hanging behind me. As I was setting that up that night, this was hanging on the wall, and I wanted to put a piece up here, and I went to reach up there, and I caught my hand on this viciously sharp point down at the bottom. Now I can do that now and then just kind of feel it and all that, but you can imagine the force that I hit it with if I started out down here and I swept my hand up and I was aiming for something 2 feet higher and I didn't know this was in the way. It hurt. And it bled a lot. I didn't need stitches. So far, I have not needed stitches. I've cut myself many times. I've been lucky. I've not needed stitches. And in some cases, I was really lucky because the sword was quite sharp. This, obviously, just a little point. But yeah, I hit the back of my hand with it one night. Very painful. But beyond that, yeah, there's no edge. There's no functionality of the weapon. So let's talk about its potential as a functional weapon, because as much as I like it as a decoration, as a conversation starter, it would not be my first choice of actual weapon. I have nothing against battle axes. I love the idea of axes. I have nothing against halberds and polearms and two-handed weapons. Those are all cool. But this one has a couple of flaws. First of all, let's just talk about the obvious one, the length. It's not that big. Now I can, you get a little bit, well, do you get any advantage? Do you get a reach advantage? You get a little bit of a power advantage, I suppose. I mean, if I cut this off here and try to wield it one-handed, it would be awkward. I definitely am getting a lot more control wielding it two-handed. But here's the problem. So with my halberds, they're about this tall. That's a good 3 feet beyond the height here. So if I'm wielding it, and let's say that the tree here is my opponent, you can see the problem. In order for me to have it primed and ready to attack, I'm completely exposed. Now with the halberds, I got a good 3 feet of shaft going beyond my hand, which I can defend with, offend with, probe, strike, parry, get their blades out of the way, and once I have an opening, I'm already primed to come right over the top with the coup de grace. The problem with this is if I wanted that, I'd have to be like this, okay, and then in order to use it, I'd have to shift my hands. Or if I didn't want to be completely open here, you know, I could be attacking, let's say this way, and I could use the staff to defend, but then in order to use the blade, I have to bring it back. And that action leaves me entirely open. So I don't really know exactly how this would be effective. In that regard, it has all the drawbacks of any two-handed weapon: no shield, no weapon in your offhand, but none of the advantages. I can't really defend with this very well. Not if it's primed, because I'm exposed. And let me demonstrate the problem with the reach. Now I'm going to go back to the Claymore here for a moment. I'm not actually suggesting that the tree is in any danger, but clearly anything between me and the tree, this is a good visual representation of the reach of this weapon. I can offend everything between me and the tree. And given how narrow the Facebook community standards are, my offense can actually go the world over. But with this sword, I can offend between here and the tree. Now, if I put this down, and I have not moved my feet, here's the problem. You can see that I haven't really gained anything in terms of reach. I can reach the tree fine, but I can't wield it this way. So I don't really gain much of an advantage in terms of reach. And if I really want to drive this point home, let me take this smaller arming sword. Okay, this is I'm going to do a video on this one later. This is probably my favorite sword. But here you go. That's how much reach I have with this sword. That's about how much reach I have with this Bardiche. That's a one-handed weapon, this is a two-handed weapon, and if I'm using that sword, I have the benefit of a shield or something in my offhand. So, again, all the drawbacks of a two-handed weapon with none of the advantages, because it's just a little bit too short. I've often joked that this is a headsman's axe, that you would only really use it to execute people who are standing still and tied down. The other problem with it, and this is a very common problem with polearms, modern replicas of polearms. Now, the reason I do it that way is to just show you it's a perfectly round shaft. It's not oval, there are no flat sections, it is not a square cross section, the way that any proper polearm should be designed. And the reason for that is one of edge alignment. If it's round, unless I'm looking at it and really thinking about what I'm doing, and I think even that was wrong, and you can see what would happen. Keeping your edge alignment is very difficult when the shaft is perfectly round. In fact, you can kind of only align it by weight, and only if I'm like hunched over like a gorilla. You know, if I just pick it up and go to swing it, I don't really know where the blade is, and you can see just then, as it comes in, I would not actually be able to cut with it. If this had an oval cross section, like if you think about a wood cutting axe, the handle is oval, and that helps to align the head of the axe. If this had some flats on it, like the pole axe that I'll do a video on later, if it had a square cross section like my Warhammer, which again, I'll show you later, but in those cases, it would be a lot easier to align the edge of the axe head. With a perfectly round handle, yeah, can't really do anything with it. Now, let's finish up talking a little bit about the length, because the obvious question I did mention earlier in the video, this is not necessarily the definitive example of a Bardiche. So you might ask, well, couldn't they design one that just happens to be a lot taller, and then you would have the advantage of that ability to probe and offend with this end of the shaft and still have it primed for a strike. I read an article once on the internet. Now, I read it on the internet, so you know it has to be true, and I read one article, therefore you know I'm an expert. But it does, the reason I bring it up is it does explain why this length, or approximately this length, would be useful. And they described it as something that a musketeer, that would be somebody with a musket, could use to put in the ground and put their rifle on and assist in aiming. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh yeah, that would be a good idea. And some of you are realizing why that's actually pretty dumb. At least I think it's pretty dumb. So imagine this. I already am carrying a musket, which is a heavy rifle. I mean, hence the need that you think you need to balance it, right? And I'm also carrying a bag of musket balls, maybe a knife, maybe a hatchet, maybe some other gear, a pack, all kinds of stuff I'm already carrying. I'm already weighed down, and I need to march several miles or maybe a couple of days to the battlefield. And some dick from the quartermaster comes out and says, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you also carry this big, heavy, awkward thing? Oh, and by the way, don't put your eye out with this pointy bit down here. And I think I would be like, no, thank you, I'm good. But you could cut wood with it. Well, I got a little hatchet I can cut wood with, and it takes up a lot less room, and it's not as awkward, and it's not as heavy. Why do I want to carry this thing? Well, you could use it to aim your gun. I'm good. I think I can aim my gun without carrying this big, heavy thing into battle. So I don't, and again, with this very thin axe head profile here, it wouldn't actually be that good for splitting wood anyway. You could accomplish that with a much smaller tool. And in terms of melee, we've just explained why it's not necessarily the best melee weapon anyway. So yeah, I don't know, food for thought. I don't know if that would actually be why this would be necessarily the length of a Bardiche, but if I can limit my comments to only this particular example, and that's why, again, sharpening it, would it be cool? Yeah, it might make it cool, but would it be the first thing I would grab if I actually had to go into combat against an armed opponent? Nah. That's about all I have to say about these two pieces. I think I'm going to try to find a more quiet place to do the next one, but we'll see how it's going to go. By the way, the next one, it should be the last video I'm doing on a pair of wall hangers, basically the two El Cid swords, Tizona and Colada del Cid. So again, if you find these videos interesting, like and subscribe, and until next time, take care.